We often hear seaweed described as a climate solution or a regenerative crop or even a superfood. But despite all the hype, it hasn't yet broken through into our daily lives in the way that many people predicted. In beauty especially, the potential is huge, but the reality is still taking shape. And I think part of the challenge lies in the history of seaweed, because most of the seaweed used in products has been wild harvested, not necessarily farmed. And that's raised questions around sustainability and supply. And the species we can farm are often different from the ones that formulators are used to, meaning there's a learning curve for science and regulation and consumer acceptance. And the result is a sector full of promise, but still, I think, waiting for its turning point. And at the same time, kelp offers functions we simply can't get from land-based plants. And that opens the door to innovation, but also to questions. What role could seaweed play in beauty? What barriers are holding it back? And what might it take for this ocean-grown ingredient to move from niche to mainstream? So in today's podcast episode, we're going to hear from an NGO connecting the beauty industry to kelp. And we're going to unpick exactly what the opportunities are for seaweed in beauty. Welcome to Green Beauty Conversations, in which I challenge the beauty industry to become sustainable, champion independent and green beauty, and encourage you to join me in making beauty better. I'm your host, Lorraine Dahlmeyer. I'm a chartered environmentalist, biologist, and the CEO of award-winning online organic cosmetic formulation school, Formula Botanica. We have tens of thousands of students in over 190 countries around the world who study with us to become organic beauty formulators and entrepreneurs. Visit our website at formulabotanica.com to try our free online formulation course. And if you want to be the first person to know what's happening in green beauty, make sure you subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app. So in today's episode, I'm joined by Samantha Garwin, Director of Market Development at GreenWave, a non-profit building scalable and equitable markets for ocean farmers. She leads initiatives that connect kelp producers with industries from food to beauty, helping companies bring seaweed from farm to formulation through education, R&D pilots, and value chain support. And since 2019, she's overseen Seaweed Source, which is an app linking more than 90 seaweed farms across North America with business development resources. And she's now spearheading the Kelp Innovation CoLab, which partners beauty brands with kelp farmers to create new ocean-based ingredients and products. And we'll be talking about all of that on the podcast today. Hi, Sam. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing so well. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about what you do. So let's start there. Can you please introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yeah. So my name is Sam Garwin, and I am the Director of Market Development at GreenWave. GreenWave is actually a nonprofit organization. We're based in Connecticut, in the United States, but we work nationally in the US and we even have partnerships globally. And our mission is to support the emerging seaweed farming sector in North America and beyond. And my role within that as Director of Market Development is to help connect ocean farmers, seaweed farmers, and kelp farmers specifically with potential markets for their crops.
Amazing, and very relevant to many conversations that I've had here on the podcast in the past. I guess the best place to start is, how did you guys get started in this?
GreenWave got started in 2014 as a training organization, like an organization providing technical assistance to farmers, teaching them how to get permits, how to actually physically set up the farms in the waters. It's kind of a network of buoys and lines, and the kelp grows off of those lines. And so we did that for many years. And then our founder wrote a book. It kind of blew up as a concept in popular culture. And we all of a sudden had this waiting list of like 8,000 people who wanted to be seaweed farmers. So we very quickly had to scale up our programming. And with that, we came to this realization that the farmers were actually growing kelp pretty well, but they were struggling with that last step of their business of actually selling the kelp, which makes sense because at least in the West, kelp is not a thing that is common. We don't have supply chains for kelp. We don't have infrastructure for kelp. Kelp is not just available in the formats that people actually want to buy it in. And the farmers didn't really have the tools or the expertise to make that happen. So our programming kind of expanded to include these downstream aspects of supporting the industry.
Wow. Imagine waking up and finding 8,000 people on your list waiting to become kelp farmers. That's incredible.
Yeah. It's a shock.
So how do you guys then bridge that gap between the seaweed farmers and the markets, especially in industries like beauty, where people might not know where to start?
Yeah, it's all about forming partnerships. And I know this is a concept that will be familiar to many of your listeners. You can't build a business alone. You decide which aspects you're going to do and what values and what your expertise is. And then you have to find strategic partners who are going to be with you on that journey, that are right-sized for wherever you are right now, but people who are experts in what they do so that you can be an expert in whatever you do. And so a lot of my job is finding end customers and downstream businesses, but also those middle players. And sometimes it's called the missing middle, because those middle of the supply chain people are actually a lot harder to find, but super critical to getting anything to market, because, it's this like unsexy processing, manufacturing, you don't have a brand name out in the world that anybody knows about. There's very little glory involved with the middle of the supply chain, but piecing together these business relationships and sort of matchmaking, if you will, across the value chain is really how we approach the problem.
Amazing. Well, we'll unpick that in a little bit more detail in a minute. I guess the other question I have around what you guys do, what role do you play in making sure that this new blue economy, I suppose, grows in a way that's sustainable rather than repeating the mistakes of land-based agriculture, for instance? And the reason I ask that is I actually have a friend who works in the regulatory body here in the UK, and he was telling me the other day that they've seen a massive boom in seaweed farm applications. So what role do you guys play in making sure that it's sustainably managed?
Yeah, such an important consideration with not just seaweed, but any new industry that we're starting in 2025 is how can we, we know better now. And so we have a responsibility to make different decisions than we did in the 1950s. When we think about kelp farming, we refer to it as regenerative, and that's because of the amazing environmental benefits that seaweed has. But the concepts of regenerative should really underpin not just the actual farming, but the entire socioeconomic system that surrounds these kelp farms. So in regenerative, of course, we're always looking to nature and trying to mimic nature. And so some of the things that we want to see when we think about the seaweed industry evolving are, first of all, diversity and like a networked quality. There are no monoliths in nature. There's no like one giant anthill that like rules all anthills. There's like, and yet ants are doing quite fine. Like they're doing fine. They're everywhere, and they all have their own different communities that are like specialized for whatever geography they're in. And so GreenWave has always supported regional networks of farmers. They tend to be smaller individual farmers, but they actually kind of have to work together in order to aggregate and in order to purchase or access processing technology. So there's a lot of resiliency there when you have multiple farmers working together, because if one of them fails, the other ones can cover the slack, and that actually keeps that first farmer going because they can kind of benefit from their partnerships there. So yes, we look for diversity and resilience and networkedness. We also want to see systems that are able to, they're very adaptable. So we always want to be growing multiple species where possible. GreenWave Start was all about combinations of seaweed and shellfish, which has evolved a little bit. We're not really seeing people doing those right on top of each other anymore. They're kind of adjacent to each other, but there still are mutual benefits. So looking at that mutuality, looking at how seaweed can be not a singular income for the waterfront communities, but part of a diverse income portfolio, in addition to whether it's salmon fishing or lobster fishing or lobstering or whatever. It's a piece of the puzzle. And it's that kind of, the puzzle itself needs to be more complex, more diverse, more networked.
Yeah, it's looking at it from a whole systems perspective, I guess. So let's talk about kelp for a minute, because you just alluded to the fact that there are multiple species. Can you tell us a little bit about kelp for people listening who don't really know anything about it?
Absolutely. Algae is the family. There's plants, there's animals, there's algae. It's different. It's not a plant. It's not an animal. Within algae, we've got macroalgae, and then we've got microalgae. Microalgae is like your spirulinas and the things that you grow in. You might have heard of like bioreactors. So like tubes with tiny little microscopic particles. We're on the other end of the spectrum. We're on macroalgae. So you can definitely see it with your eyeballs. And within macroalgae, there's stuff that grows in freshwater. There's stuff that grows in saltwater. The stuff that grows in saltwater, we call seaweed. It's in the ocean. Within seaweed, There's different colors. You can have green, you can have brown, you can have red. The one that you've been hearing about with the methane reduction in cattle, that's a red. That grows in warm waters generally. The stuff that we're farming in the US, in Canada, and Europe primarily is brown macroalgae, which is also known as kelp. Kelp is just kind of like the general term for big brown seaweed. And within kelp, there are dozens of species. So again, the most popular one, the one that is being cultivated most widely, is called sugar kelp or Saccharina latissima. But there are lots of others, and there are ones that are specific to different regions. So we do a lot of work in Alaska. There is bull kelp, there is winged kelp, there's dragon kelp, there's 5-rib kelp, there's 3-rib kelp. There's all these different species, and each of them, while they share a lot of general compositional traits, each of them has slightly different compositions and benefits.
Wow, I love the idea of dragon kelp. Haven't come across that one before. But that's amazing because, obviously it's this catch-all term. But I mean, you're talking about kelp species that are being farmed. Are they different in any way to the ones that are traditionally wild harvested?
To your question about what are we doing differently with seaweed farming versus that we know from messing up land-based farming, in the West, it's generally agreed upon that you only farm native species. Nobody in a given geography is farming a species that you couldn't go find out in the wild and theoretically wild harvest. That said, the species that we are growing are not ones that have been historically wild harvested en masse. So the most common one that has been wild harvested in Iceland and in Maine in the US is rockweed. It's often referred to as kelp. It's actually technically a little bit different than that, but and it's the kind of smaller stuff that you see growing in the intertidal zone. And so we are not farming rockweed. We are farming these bigger species of brown.
Is that the reason why it's slightly different to ones that have been sort of more traditionally used, because they are bigger and possibly faster growing?
Yes. Well, that's one of the reasons. So if you think about how farming happens, it all starts with seed. A lot of us, I know before I got into seaweed, I had never thought too hard about, how do farmers on land even get seed? And the answer is there are places that make seed. Like there are entire farms and labs that exist just to make seed. So the same thing is true with seaweed. In order to plant something in the ocean, you have to create seed. And so the reason that sugar kelp is the primary species that we grow actually just has to do with which species we figured out the life cycle of first and which one we were able to produce seed for. And this was all done by, actually in Connecticut. This is why GreenWave is in Connecticut. It was done by a man named Charlie Yarish at a university in Connecticut. So sugar kelp was and is selected because it has the ability to grow incredibly quickly and create a lot of biomass in a very short amount of time, which speaks to the ability to, over time, have this be, I don't love the word commodity, but have it be a real, a meaningful ingredient, a meaningful crop, a meaningful input into food and cosmetics and materials and all kinds of other possible applications.
Well, you just picked up on something I wanted to pivot to next, actually, is why is kelp particularly exciting for the beauty sector? What can it do that maybe land-based plants can't, perhaps?
Yeah. If you think about the facts that we talked about, so there's animals, there's plants, there's algae. Algae are an entirely different thing. It's an entirely different palette, if you will, if you think of yourselves as painters in the beauty industry, entirely different palette of just chemicals and functions. And there's a lot of things that are similar to plants, but slightly different. And that means, slightly different benefits. Some of the most promising ingredients are these polysaccharides, these really valuable compounds like fucoidan. A lot of people have heard of fucoidan before. There's also alginates. There's sugars like mannitol. There's also these phenolic compounds like fluorotannins, and then a pigment called fucoxanthin. And all of these compounds are, the benefits that they can provide are things like anti-inflammatory, antioxidants. They also have kind of matrix stabilizing effects for formulations. If you think about kelp does in the water, it's busy protecting itself from salt water and from the sun at all times. So there's a lot of hydration benefits, barrier integrity benefits, and some possible like SPF or like UV protection benefits, although those are a little bit earlier in their research. And I guess finally, I see a really amazing opportunity. There's kind of a crossover between the benefits that seaweed has in food and the possible benefits for personal care and beauty products. I just got back from the Bite event in New York City, the Beauty Independent event. And there's so much that's just about like holistic whole body health, right? In these like intersections between looking good and actually being healthy. And seaweed has just an incredible amount of nutrients for the gut. And so as we think about like, how does the gut relate to the skin and how does inflammation on the inside come out through the skin, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for kind of cosmeceuticals and gut skin formulations that work together to create amazing beauty products.
Fascinating. Well, we're certainly seeing a rise in interest around seaweed in the beauty industry. Have you guys at GreenWave connected farmers to beauty brands at all?
A bit. Yeah. Are some seaweed companies, some farmers have actually developed their own products in partnership with formulators. But more often what we're doing is connecting farmers to these sort of intermediary companies. I know you had Macro Oceans on the podcast previously, but these companies that sort of sit in that middle, in that missing middle, and take the raw kelp and transform it through green chemistry into various different extracts and formulations that then can be used as ingredients in beauty products. Because most companies, like Lush is famous for their kind of minimally processed, like you can see the ingredients, but most products are not looking to have bits of kelp visible in them, nor is it necessarily the most effective for conferring the benefits and delivering the compounds that we want to be delivering. So yeah, so we're more often connecting farmers with these biorefineries or green chemistry companies who can extract the kelp and get it into the formats that beauty companies want.
That makes sense. Actually, I remember reading years ago, I mean, this was when I first started to get into natural beauty, about these people who worked in seaweed farms who discovered they had incredibly soft hands because they were always touching the seaweed. So I'm not surprised to see that it's starting to take off. However, I don't think the consumer out there is really that aware of seaweed yet. What have you guys found in terms of just sort of consumer awareness around what seaweed can mean in personal care or in food or in other areas?
You're right. There isn't a lot of awareness on the consumer side yet. When I am out in the world and I tell people I work supporting the seaweed industry, the most common reaction I get is, oh, my kid loves the seaweed snacks at the grocery store. So there's a vague awareness that seaweed exists. I do think it has a bit of a general health aura, but I think it tends to fall into the category of things that are good for me that I know I should be consuming, but I'm still not. So I think the challenge for beauty people is like, we know that it has amazing benefits. And so how do we sort of transform it? And I think this is like the power and the magic of brands is how do we make this thing that is objectively amazing for us be perceived by consumers as amazing and as desirable, and how do we make it easiar for people to do the right things for themselves and for their health and for the planet?
Yeah, no,
I do think we will get there.
I get that totally. By the way, I mean, when I hear the word seaweed, I immediately think to going out for Japanese and having a good wakame seaweed salad. But there's so many wonderful ways you can use it. I mean, obviously, you're talking about the fact that the brands need to play a big part in creating consumer acceptance around using seaweed in their daily life. Does anything else need to change from a scientific or a regulatory standpoint?
Certainly from a regulatory standpoint, many of the seaweeds, many of the kelps that I just listed off don't have, are not necessarily in the US, generally recognized as safe. And that doesn't mean they aren't. It just means like we haven't been growing them so that it's not even on the radar of the regulators. So we do just at a basic level need to get the various species that we want to use into the various regulatory systems, have them identified as safe, give them their inky terms, and just get them established as ingredients. Beyond that, I do think that the format is very important. We need to figure out a few standardized-ish formats for the kelps to be entering the beauty formulation space, whether those are extracts or oils or powders or what have you, and be very clear about which formats have which compounds in them and what those uses are. So I think that the role of the chemists here is key in figuring out how to get more kelp into the market.
I'm sure there are some formulators listening to you right now thinking, how can I do this? And you guys are actually going to be helping some formulators with that as well. So that brings me on to something you've created at GreenWave called the CoLab. Is that the correct name?
Yeah, the Kelp Innovation CoLab.
Tell me more. What is it?
Well, it really grew out of years of doing this market development work and realizing that there was this mismatch between what farmers are growing and selling, which is raw kelp, and what brands are looking to purchase, which is functional ingredients. And so we launched the CoLab to fill that gap, or to bridge that gap, rather. The goal of the program is to create a structured and collaborative R&D environment where personal care brands can explore kelp-based formulations and share learnings with one another and with our ingredient supplier, which is Macro Oceans, co-develop products that are both innovative and environmentally responsible.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. Well, tell me more. I mean, what does a beauty brand have to do in order to take part in this?
Yeah, well, so we have an application form online. It's pretty lightweight. At the end of the day, we're looking for 5 to 10 beauty brands who consider themselves to be disruptors, who consider themselves sort of visionary, because this is a new ingredient. And we want to see that we are already doing things in the sustainability space, already are values-driven brands. So after applying, we will interview you, and then we will offer it the 10 brands the opportunity to participate. What this opportunity comes along with is up to $50,000 in funding to go towards formulation or clinical trials or whatever the brand thinks they need to bring a kelp product to market. So this is pretty concretely for people who are like, yes, kelp, I would like to be one of the first brands to bring a product that harnesses these amazing superpowers of kelp to market.
What an incredible opportunity, both from a research, a financial standpoint, just everything. It sounds very exciting. I mean, how do you hope that beauty brands will tell the story of kelp then in the products that they create?
Well, I do think the environmental piece is there. We know that people care about the environmental piece. I think that is not necessarily something that we need to lead with because it's a bonus. So I hope that people will tell that story, but I'm not expecting that will be the center. I think we really need to focus on these functional benefits. They are there, and that's part of why the funding for this program can go to clinical trials, because we know you can have the best formula in the world. It can be the most effective formula in the world, but if you can't say that on the outside of the bottle or in your marketing copy, not going to go very far. So we want to focus on the functional qualities of the kelp. I think have a really amazing transparency story. So the ingredients that we're going to be using in CoLab come from farms, come from kelp that it comes off of farms in Alaska. As part of the program, we are actually going to be taking everyone to a kelp farm in Alaska to see the kelp grow and understand more about what is this stuff. And so that traceability story of this is not some, made in some lab somewhere. I mean, it does pass through a lab, but it is a real ingredient that is grown in the cold, clean waters of Alaska. I think that's a really incredible thing to show consumers that it doesn't have to be a black box, and you can hold your beauty brands to a higher standard when it comes to traceability and transparency.
So is the Kelp Innovation CoLab geographically restricted? Do you have to be in North America to take part?
We are focusing on North America. We would consider brands that are sort of based elsewhere but have a presence in North America. I think that would be all right. We don't have, I think it was mostly for a scheduling issue that for our first launch, our first year, we want to keep it a little simpler with time zones.
I totally get that. Having students and staff all over the world, I totally understand. So where can people go to if they want to apply for the CoLab?
kelp-colab.org is where to go. If you kelp-colab.com also works, it'll just redirect you to the org. Yeah, so that's our website. It'll have it has all the information. It has a big orange apply button, which I encourage you to click.
Are there any time constraints on applying?
Yes, applications opened on September 8th, and they will go through October 6th. Depending on how many we receive, there may or may not be an extension. So I encourage everyone to get in their application early if they can.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're listening to this thinking, this sounds like my bag, go and get in there now. Well, you can. I mean, it sounds like a really interesting opportunity for beauty brands. So I guess to round off, where do you see the biggest opportunities for kelp over the next 5 to 10 years? Is it in food or packaging or beauty or pharma or somewhere unexpected, in fact?
I think the opportunity right now is in beauty. we have these extracts ready to go. They just need someone creative and game to take that first step. Food has been in the works for a long time. I think we are starting to see seaweed moving out of this hero ingredient role in food and more into functional ingredients in food also. So I would expect to see sort of an evolution of that over the coming years. And then I do think that we should expect to see seaweed in packaging. It's just a bit further out. I think we are still 5 to 10 years out on that, but it's going to be such an incredible improvement in packaging sustainability when that happens. Especially for the polyfilms, for the thin films, any of these end of life materials or single use materials, to be able to make those out of seaweed and have them just biodegrade will be a real benefit to everyone.
Exciting times ahead. And yes, I think although 5 to 10 years might seem like a long time, it seems to go quite quickly. So before you know it, we'll be holding seaweed packaging, I'm sure, in our hands. Sam, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Where can people find out more about you and GreenWave? And I know you've already told us where we can go for the Kelp CoLab, but what about the general organization?
Yeah, greenwave.org is our website. You can also find us on Instagram at greenwave.org, and we're on LinkedIn. We're on all the socials. So we would love to connect with you.
We will put those links in the show notes. Go and have a click. Go and have a look around. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It's been really lovely chatting to you.
Thank you. It's been delightful.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thoughts on this episode? Have you ever used seaweed in your cosmetics? Or if you're a formulator, have you ever used it in the formulations that you've made? Leave us a comment on our social channels, as both the Formula Botanica team and I love hearing from you. And if you want to hear some more episodes about the topics we discussed today, please do delve back into the podcast archives. Talked about seaweed quite a lot here on the podcast, actually. And some great examples include episode 215, in which I interviewed Matthew Perkins of Macro Oceans, who GreenWave is, of course, partnering with for their Kelp Innovation CoLab. Or episode 235, in which I interviewed Catarina Rica of Inclita Seaweed Solutions in Portugal, where she explained how they're working with seaweed all across Europe to create cosmetic extracts. There is a wealth of information in our old episodes, and I do encourage you to go back and listen to them. So thank you for joining Sam and I for this latest episode of Green Beauty Conversations. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do leave us a 5-star review so that other people can enjoy these conversations too. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever your favorite podcast app is, and stay tuned for the next episode. Follow Formula Botanica at Formula Botanica on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest, LinkedIn. We are everywhere. And come and give me a follow at Lorraine Dahlmeyer on Instagram and LinkedIn. Visit our website at formulabotanica.com and sign up for our free online formulation course today.